guys, it's Melanie. Welcome to my channel. It's time for day 9 of my Once Upon a Book Club Advent box. So stay tuned. So we're getting closer to the end of the Advent box. This has been so much fun. I have cried with so many of these stories, like, oh my goodness. Okay, so if this is your first of these, I would definitely suggest going back to day 1. The stories aren't connected in any way, so you can just listen to any of them. But if you wanted to see what all of the gifts were, I would start back on day 1. So I have my book here, the 12 Days of Book Clubmas. It has 12 short stories. Each story has a gift that goes along with it, and I read you the story and I open the gift and show it to you. So let's get started. Today's story is called Memories at Maple Grove Inn by Christine Eckhart. Well, there you have it, folks. It's gonna be a big one. The blizzard of the decade. If you can, stay inside till the storm has passed and the roads have been cleared, the news anchor announced. This was not the first blizzard Genevieve Parnell had endured. Winter always meant a lot of snow in Mapleton, and sometimes that meant the occasional blizzard. The last one had hit over 7 years ago, but Genevieve had felt like that one wasn't so extreme as the word blizzard usually describes. Today, everything she saw from the weather app on her phone to the news on TV said this storm was going to be worse than anything they had seen in a long time. For a lot of people, a blizzard meant they needed to do a little extra grocery shopping. For Genevieve and her sister Joan, it meant something completely different. Threat level white, she mumbled to herself as she shut off the TV. Jen rinsed out the tea sediments from her mug and set it in the sink. All right, Austin, Mommy's off to work, she called over her shoulder. The snow-white cat that was lying on the couch in the other room perked up her ears. Jen came to scratch the cat behind her ears and was rewarded with a soft purr. I'll see you tonight, she said, kissing the furry little head. After putting on her coat, she grabbed her gloves, scarf, and hat that were piled on the table by the door. Jen got into her car and began the 1.5-mile drive to the Maple Grove Inn. Because she lives so close, Jen usually liked to walk to work. It gave her a chance to listen to podcasts or mentally prepare for the day ahead, and allowed her to get in some extra exercise, which meant she didn't have to feel guilty about skipping her yoga routine if her body needed some rest after a long day. Today, not only was it freezing outside, but Jen also anticipated she may need to run some last-minute, blizzard-related errands, and she'd want her car. She always looked forward to the first glimpse of the Maple Grove Inn through the trees. Any minute now, she'd be coming up on the majestic white building, the black shutters and roof helping it stand out amidst the snow that so often blanketed the ground this time of year. The Maple Grove Inn had been in her family for 3 generations and had been owned by close family friends before her family took over. The Parnells had celebrated birthdays, graduations, and weddings at the inn, but it had seen them through more than just the celebrations. It had seen the everyday motions of life that only the most intimate of our friends and family are aware of. It had seen even the smallest of moments. Genevieve had frequently stared at the dining room table in frustration when she couldn't figure out her math homework. The front lawn had given her a soft place to land as she practiced cartwheels and somersaults with her sister. And the tiny side porch just off the main porch where the guests usually sat with the 2 wooden rocking chairs had been her favorite place to read or sit and think. She would often sit there with her parents or other family members because it gave them a small bit of privacy, but it was close enough for them to hear if the guests needed them or if the staff had a question for them. As a girl, Jen had seriously thought about carving her initials into one of those chairs to mark it forever as hers, but she was too scared to do it, worried that her grandfather would find it and lecture her about preserving the family's history. Jen had sat in that same chair for strength to text her first crush, for good luck when she opened her college acceptance letters, and for comfort when her grandpa had passed away. Yes, the inn was her family just as much as her sister was, and every generation of Parnells liked to think of the guests as family too. But of course, the family you don't see very often, so you're politer and more formal with them than the family you see all the time. Jen pulled into the parking lot, grateful she didn't have to think about tree branches laden with snow falling on people's cars. When she was younger, she had been sad to learn that they had cut down the trees that used to stand here years before she was born, and the inn had expanded. But as an adult, she now saw the practicality of such things and was glad of one less thing to worry about. Making a mental note to replace one of the missing black ribbons on the evergreen wreaths that hung in the front windows, Jen walked up the path to the back entrance that led to their offices and the staff break room. Brooks, one of their newly hired cooks, was savoring a cup of coffee and some fruit. "Looks like a blizzard is headed our way," he waved at Jen as she passed. "Oh yeah," she said, coming to a brief stop. "Threat level white." And after seeing the confused look on his face, she added, "That's what we like to call big snowstorms anyway." Brooks chuckled. "That does make sense. We'll have a staff meeting about it in a bit. Make sure we're prepared for everything." "Sounds good." Jen waved a goodbye and headed for her office. She and Joan shared an office, a small cozy room with 2 desks, the comfiest couch they could find, and a fireplace. That was one of the best things about a Massachusetts inn. There was a fireplace in almost every room that immediately made you feel welcome and warm. "Threat level white," Joan announced as Jen passed through the open door. "I know, the warnings are everywhere." "How does our usual 2-meeting plan sound?" They had started to hold 2 staff meetings whenever something came up last minute like this to accommodate everyone's schedules and shifts at the inn. It also ensured no one was too cramped when they met in the break room. "Sounds good. What do you think, 10 and 8? Jen proposed their usual morning and afternoon time slots. "Yeah, I think we'll get just about everyone between the 2. "Perfect. Well, let's spread the word. Calls or personal delivery?" Joan took a sip of her coffee. "Calls. I just got this coffee. I'm not walking away from it." "Okay, then," Jen smiled. "I'll make the rounds." They liked to tell the staff in person about any emergency meetings. It was rare that they had to do such things, and the inn was small enough that it was easy to track them all down. Plus, standing around checking your email was seriously frowned upon while on duty, so no one would know there was an impromptu meeting. Jen headed back to the break room to see if anyone had arrived since she'd seen Brooks. After speaking to George and Bree in addition to Brooks, Jen turned back around to start towards the kitchen. A muffled thud stopped her in her tracks. Knowing full well the inn was not haunted, she had tested and overcome such fears as a child. Jen looked for the nearest source of the sound. It wasn't the sharp metal bangs or scrapes that normally came from the pots and pans in the kitchens. No, it sounded more like something fell over onto a carpet. Jen's eyes flickered to the hall closet. When was the last time they had cleaned that out? Nervous about the miscellaneous objects that may avalanche down on her after opening the door, Jen slowly turned the knob and eased the door open. "Oh boy," she moaned. There may not have been an avalanche, but there was definitely way too much packed into that tiny closet. So many odds and ends had found a home here, from seasonal decorations to flyers for past town events. As much as she'd like to clean and organize it, today it was just not the day. There was a blizzard on the way and they needed to be prepared. One day, she informed the closet as she closed the door, one day she would be back to do some major organizing. Jen continued through the inn, speaking with the kitchen and restaurant staff and the cleaning staff. "Okay, so threat level white," Joan said, looking out over the assembled team. "This is the first big storm at the inn for a few of you. We'll explain our strategies for everything as we hear from our teams." "So," Jen began, "how prepared are we for the storm? Randall?" Randall was the head chef at the Maple Grove Inn. He had been the sous chef when Jen and Joan were young, taking over for Linda, the previous head chef, when she retired. Jen liked the assurance Randall brought to his role. He had been working at the inn longer than most of the employees and acted as a friend and a father to everyone. "We're pretty much set. The menu for the next week is already planned out. If the power goes out, we can easily adjust to use the perishable items first. Some of our deliveries are scheduled for later in the week. What they can't deliver today, we'll buy to make sure we're covered. We'll set up a schedule for overnight stays after the meeting." "Good." Jen and Joan liked to start off with Randall for a reason. He had experience with emergencies like this and knew what needed to be done. He had even done many of the overnight stays himself, calling it a special evening when he and his wife stayed in one of the available rooms so they'd be together if he couldn't make it home the next day. When big storms like this come up, we like to keep at least one person from the kitchen, cleaning, and administrative teams overnight just in case we're snowed in or out, Jen explained. That way, we can still care for any guests that are trapped at the inn with us as best as we can. Everything won't be up to usual standards, of course, if we're working with a reduced team, but at least we'll be able to still move forward. She could see heads nodding as she looked out over the gathering. Plus, Joan added, by the time we can dig a safe path, or by the time the storm calms down, another member of the team can make it to the inn to swap places with anyone on duty. How often do you get stuck here? Asked George, one of their most recent hires on the office team. It's very rare. Most of the time we do overnight stays. People just spend the night here and can leave and be back to their usual shifts. But we like to be prepared just in case. Randall looked at George. Remind me to tell you about the time I got stuck here with Mr. J and Miss C. I was making sandwiches by candlelight. Jen smiled. Though they went by first names here, Randall had insisted on calling her grandparents Mr. and Miss Randall, and slightly amended it to Mr. and Miss plus the first letter of their first name for Jen's parents. Now that Jen and Joan ran the inn, Randall had decided to modernize this nomenclature, calling the sisters Miss Jen and Miss Joan. She had been a girl when the blizzard that Randall referenced had hit Massachusetts. She and Joan had stayed at the inn with her parents, who wanted to oversee everything, and the sisters got a hands-on education of the emergency protocols for the inn. And speaking of candlelight, Nicole? Jen and Austin were all set to stay the night. She had plenty of cat food, a litter box in the corner, and Austin was fine sleeping in whatever bed Jen slept in. Though the sleeper couch wasn't as comfortable and as spacious as her regular bed, it was good enough to spend a night or two on. She and Joan had purposely put a small couch that doubled as a bed in their office. It was useful if there were any emergencies and they needed to spend the night, or if they'd been working long hours during a wedding and just needed to crash. Joan had 2 small kids that would have to stay home from daycare and school during the storm, so Jen volunteered to stay. Joan would stay overnight whenever the next emergency came around. Hopefully, that was a few years ahead of them, and the kids would be older by then. All right, Austin, are we all ready for bed? The cat meowed and zoomed around the small room in response. Guess not. Jen knew that when the cat grew tired, she'd curl up in bed. Jen, however, was already exhausted. It had been a long day of preparing for the storm. It wasn't supposed to be bad until later the next morning, but when it came to storms like this, it was better to be safe than sorry. Jen crawled under the covers and squished the pillow underneath her head until she found the perfect spot. After double-checking the alarm on her phone for the next day, she picked up Pride and Prejudice from the floor and began to read. Jen woke up in the middle of the night after a dream about a guest loudly complaining that giant maple donuts were invading the inn. True, it was annoying, but it smelled like syrup everywhere, and Jen found that rather pleasant. She had been trying to assure the guests that there was no way they could have foreseen the invasion of giant donuts, and though they were somewhat unprepared, the entire Maple Grove team was doing their best to rectify the situation. Giant donuts are not attacking us, she mentally told herself. The dream had seemed so real that she thought she could still smell the maple glaze. There was definitely something going on outside. She could hear the wind whipping through the trees and around the building, a soft whistle announcing the coming storm. At least it's not giant donuts, she silently added, and she turned over and drifted back to sleep. Giant donuts were definitely not surrounding the inn, but the blizzard certainly was. Jen had been awake for a few minutes and was luxuriating in the coziness of the bed when her alarm went off. There were several texts from her sister and some from a few friends and employees from the inn, all relating to the same message. The storm had come early. Jen slid back one of the curtains to reveal a maelstrom of wind and snow. She couldn't see a thing. Turns out staying the night had been a good call. There was no way she could have walked here in the storm. As bad as it looked, the electricity at least seemed to be working fine. For now, anyway. Austin softly meowed as she weaved back and forth near Jen's legs. We're okay, Jen assured her. We're safe inside. The cat sat down on her hind legs and stared at Jen as if to say, Of course we're safe. I just want breakfast, please. After feeding the cat, Jen quickly got dressed. Now that the storm was here, there was a lot for her to check on. Maple pancakes or oatmeal, Miss Jen? Randall asked as soon as she walked into the kitchen. How could I possibly turn down your maple pancakes? No one's been able to turn them down yet. As Jen moved to grab a mug and select a flavor of tea that went with maple, Jerry, one of the servers who had volunteered to stay, made up a plate of pancakes for her. "How's everything in the kitchen this morning?" "Good as griddle cakes," Randall beamed. "And I'm sure they're very good griddle cakes." "You bet they are." Jerry had set the full plate down in front of her. "Thanks," she said, as Jerry grabbed a few more pancake-laden plates for the guests and left for the dining room. Randall continued flipping pancakes on his griddle as he talked. "With 2 options for each meal, Jerry and I are doing okay. If the storm doesn't die down and replacements can't come in, we'll cut it back to 1 so we can save time. You may need to, from the way they've described the storm. I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon." Jen grabbed her mug and the plate of pancakes. "Thanks for staying and working overtime. We really appreciate it. You girls, this place, it's my family, and I'm always here for my family." "And your family would do anything for you too," Jen smiled. "I'll be back later to check in with you." Jen headed back to her office. At least she could have a delicious breakfast while she called all the employees to tell them not to come until the storm let up. By mid-afternoon, Jen had made the rounds several times over, making sure the staff who'd stayed had everything under control and all the guests were taken care of. All was going smoothly. Jen intended to get through some emails and paperwork while everything was quiet, but after answering a few, she started to fidget in her chair. "Maybe I just need a break," she thought. Jen picked up her book and started to read. She had read an entire page without really paying attention to anything that was happening before she realized that this wasn't the answer she was looking for. Normally, she would have gone for a walk or to sit in her favorite rocking chair, but that was impossible today with the storm. Another walk through the hallways would have to suffice. It was strange to wander down the hall and not hear the voices of the employees banging from the kitchen or the wheels on the cleaning carts. Jen had always thought the snow had an odd muffling effect on the noises of the world, and today that seemed to be true. Yesterday, the sounds of the inn had been all around her. Something about the current absence of sound magnified in her memory the thumping noise she'd heard yesterday. "I said I'd be back," she thought. As she neared the closet, she felt the nervous energy that was plaguing her to sharpen and focus on the mysteries that were contained in that closet. Jen had taken most of the boxes and piles back to her office to sort out so she wouldn't be making a mess and a fire hazard right in the middle of the hallway. She left the boxes of extra Maple Grove Inn pens and notepads where they were. They were heavy and didn't need to organize those. All she had to do was put a label on them later. She found all kinds of things in her organizing endeavor. Way too many loose rubber bands and paper clips, old press clippings about the inn or other inns they wanted to learn about, a stack of old room menus that she needed to recycle, and many bottles of lotion and shampoo they had been testing when they were considering changing the beauty line they carried. Her phone rang, and Jen scanned the room full of boxes and piles to find it. "You'll never guess what I'm doing," Jen informed her sister when she answered. Riding the mattress down the stairs," Joan guessed. They had seen it in the Princess Diaries and decided to try it on the inn's big staircase when they were little. It had worked better in the movies, but it did give them hours of fun and giggling. "No, there are people here." "Googling cat costumes. I'm at work, you know." Joan feigned a sigh. "Fine, what are you doing?" "Going through that hall closet by the office." "Oh man, I haven't looked in there in a while. Is it bad?" "Well, we have stacks of hotel service cards from the 1960s, so yeah, I'd say it's bad." "Yikes. Hey, Sam, no standing on the couch, please." Joan's voice was distant as she called to her daughter. "How are the kids?" Jen asked, placing an old newspaper in the recycling pile. "Anxious to play in the snow, but they are satisfied with watching Disney movies for now." "Ah, yes, the captivating power of Disney." "We know it well." Joan went back to the original subject. "I called to see how everything was going. The place must be quiet if you're cleaning the closet." "Weirdly quiet. Plus, I just can't concentrate on anything else." Been there. At least it gives the staff some downtime. Don't want anyone to overwork because there aren't that many of you there." "Very true. Randall only made 2 dishes for breakfast, and for lunch, he's clearly cutting back." "That's impressive. Well, let me know if I can help with anything from here." "Thanks, will do." Jen slid the phone onto the couch and took a sip from her water bottle. Time to attack those old boxes that had been shoved back into the corner of the closet. They had a thick layer of dust on them so she could tell no one had touched them in years. Jen gingerly lifted the lid of the first box, trying to stay as dust-free as possible. On top lay a few newspaper clippings of her grandparents when they ran the inn. Jen put these aside. She'd have to find a frame or at least some plastic covers to preserve these. There were some drawings with her mother's name written haphazardly in crayon along the bottom. She began to suspect her grandparents had packed these boxes. It was sweet that they had kept the drawings with the newspaper clippings. To her grandparents, both of these things seemed just as important. But that's the kind of people they were, devoted to all of their family members. And now it is time to open our gift. Okay, here is our day 9 gift, and it's very cute. It says it is the most bookish time of year. I love it. And it's taped closed. Hold on. What in the world is this? Okay, so we have this. I don't know what this is, but there's writing all over it. Let's read our story a little bit more and maybe we'll learn what this is. Because there is like a highlighted part with the story. A patch of white with script handwriting caught her eye. Thinking she might be discovering an old letter or something, she reached in. She was surprised when her fingers pulled out a steering wheel cover, decorated all over with the same script that she had initially spotted. Okay, so it's a steering wheel cover. All right, that's cool. I'm putting this on my car. Yep. I love it. This is very cool. Okay, so there's only a couple of pages left. Yeah. So let's continue with our story. And suddenly, flashes of memories with her grandparents came back to her. Sitting on the side porch, reading books with her grandma, playing Monopoly with Joan when their grandparents were babysitting, and riding in the car with her grandpa. Windows rolled down to let in the crisp fall air and the drums and horns of a big band music blaring from the radio. Her grandpa had loved all kinds of music. There was always something playing on the record player that used to stand in the sitting room, but big band music and barbershop had always held a special place in his heart. And more than anything, Grandpa loved to sing, to enjoy this first-hand way of experiencing the music he loved so well. Jen was a modern woman in many ways, but she had inherited the love of this kind of music from her grandpa. She played songs performed by the Andrews sisters just as often as she listened to Ellie Goulding. Jen was especially fond of the barbershop quartet scenes in The Music Man. She loved old musicals, the clothes, the rapid-fire conversations, and the songs that wove their melodies into your head and their harmonies into your heart. The songs that expressed love and longing better than any modern-day love ballad, and the tunes and humorous plays on words that made you chuckle or even laugh out loud. Jen held the steering wheel cover, gently tracing its curved outlines. My dearest darling, Lida Rose. Jen could clearly make out the script that sat right by her thumb. That had been her grandpa's pet name for her grandma. Sometimes it just came out in speech as dearest or darling, sometimes Rose or Rosie, but in letters and cards, it was always just like this. My dearest darling, Lida Rose. And then the lights flickered and everything was hidden in darkness. Jen was hoping they'd get through the storm without losing power, but she knew the reality was that they had been lucky to retain the power for so long. The faintest gray light coming in from the window helped Jen find her phone. She flicked open the flashlight app and light burst into the room. Using her phone, she found her way to the office closet where the flashlights and lanterns were kept. The darkest had prompted her into the problem-solving mode. The memories of her grandparents hurriedly shoved to the back of her mind in favor of emergency plans for the inn and its residents. They need lamps in the kitchen and lobby and the sitting room first. Another phone light spilled into the hallway. Oh good. Jerry, can you take this into the kitchen? And here, save your phone, she told him, handing over a lamp and a flashlight. Sure thing. There are a few more lamps in this closet if you need them too. Thanks, I'll be back for another one, he replied and headed back to the kitchen. Jen spent the next hour distributing flashlights, checking on guests, and checking in with staff members. They had set up some board games in the sitting room for the guests to play by candlelight. It was still too dark for books, and most people were trying to conserve the batteries on their phones or computers. Randall was figuring out electricity-free recipes for dinner, and Daniel was checking the backup generators in the back room to see if he could get them working. With the commotion around the power outage, Jen had forgotten about her organizing project and the memories it had elicited. But now, in a momentary lull in activity, Jen's mind began to drift back to her grandparents and her parents and everyone who had helped the Maple Grove Inn grow and become what it was today. How many people had worked in this inn over time, made it their home for a few months or a few years, and contributed to the success and the warmth of the place? Her grandparents had been gone for a few years now. It was still strange to think of the world without them. Jen's mother had run the inn when Marion and Paul Parnell had retired, and she too had been brought up working there. Jen's father had helped out where he could, but his work as a teacher and now principal of the local high school had kept him pretty busy. "I miss you," Jen thought to her grandparents. "We all miss you." The lights flickered and came back on. Cheers and cries of relief could be heard coming from all directions within the Maple Grove Inn. The next few moments were full of electronic beeps of all tones and decibels, signaling that everything hooked up to the electricity was coming back to life. "Lida Rose, I'm home again, Rose," a four-part harmony sang. It was faint but clear, the beginning of one of her grandparents' favorite and therefore one of her favorite songs. Jen could hear it coming from the direction of their office. "To get the sun back in the sky," the next part in the song came rolling toward her. Jen turned and took a few steps toward the direction of the song. The barbershop music continued as she strode down the hallway, her steps falling more hurriedly on the carpet as the song played on. What did she think she was going to find? It was a song that had brought her so much joy, so why did she feel nervous? But she had to see the source for herself. She had to know for sure. She was so close now, only a few more steps. The song was reaching a crescendo now, all the passion and strength of the singers blending together to say, "So here is my love song, not fancy or fine." Jen had swung open the door to find her empty office just the way she had left it. There was a short pause in the music. Jen knew it well, but her heart seemed to pause along with it. "Lida Rose, oh won't you be mine," the song continued. She picked her way through the piles on the floor to reach her computer. Sure enough, the song was pulled up on the screen and playing. The sudden return of the power must have restarted her computer, and when everything turned back on again, it had somehow started to play this song. Jen turned the volume down a bit. She didn't want to disturb the entire building, but she sat down in her chair to listen to the remainder of the tune. There may be a blizzard outside. She may be running an inn full of guests with a reduced staff. She may be trying to organize the chaos that was the hall closet, but in this moment she felt calm, serene even. The harmonies continued to float through the air, their ribbons of sound twirling through the air and settling around her like a gentle hug. "We miss you too," they seemed to say. Jen closed her eyes, trying to stay present, to stay here in this moment, to enjoy a few more moments with her grandparents. She had heard other people relate impossible to explain scenarios of those they had lost influence in events on Earth just to say hello to their loved ones. But Jen never thought that would happen to her. After all, she had the Maple Grove Inn. Signs and memories of her grandparents were everywhere within these walls. Now that the moment had come, though, she didn't want it to end. When final notes of the song faded, Jen pressed pause on her computer. She didn't want to be startled by whatever song the computer decided to play next. A few moments of silence passed, allowing Jen to cement the entire experience in her memory. With a sigh, Jen surveyed the room, her eyes wandering over the piles where her mind tried to access the best way to deal with all of them now that the power was back on. "The best endings always start with the beginning," she said out loud to the room full of memories. It had been one of her grandfather's favorite sayings. As a child, she wasn't quite sure what to make of it. It was probably some adult gibberish she didn't understand. Now Jen understood that it was more about not letting the fear or worries about something get in the way. It was about starting and meeting those fears and worries as you came to them. Sometimes things you dreaded didn't even come at all. The power of beginning your task made the scary bits lose all their power. After a swig from her water bottle to fortify her for her task, she took a deep breath and stood. Just as she made her way back to the center position around which she had been building her piles, the phone rang. It was Joan. "Hey, we got our power back," Jen was happy to report. "Ours is still out. But Jen, you will not believe what just happened." "Is everything okay?" "We're all fine, and no one is hurt or anything like that." "Oh, good." "We were in the living room. Sam and I were playing with that puzzle thing you got for her birthday when Camden just started singing Rosie Rose, Rose, Rosie Rose, Rose. And I swear it sounded just like that song, Light a Rose, Grandpa used to sing. Jen wasn't sure how to respond. Her mind needed a moment to process Joan's story. He just kept singing, and I asked him what it was. He said it was the Rose song, which I think was already pretty clear. But when I asked him if he made it up, he said no, and that he had heard it on my phone. And Light a Rose is on your phone? Yeah, I added it when Sam was born, thinking I might use it as a lullaby. But Frank found something else, so that's what we used. The song has been on my phone ever since. I don't think I've ever played it for them, though. How crazy is it that with all the games and apps and music on my phone, he finds his way to that song? Wow. Was just about all Jen could muster. And learned it well enough to sing the melody, even though he doesn't know the words. So I played it for the kids, and I just got this feeling like, I don't know, like Grandma and Grandpa were in the other room or something. And all I had to do was get up and go over there to see them. At this point, Jen felt less mystified and more awed about the situation, and was ready to relate her own experience. Well, if you think that's crazy, just wait till you hear this. And that is the end of this story. What did you guys think of this story? Did you like it? Did you not? Comment down below and let me know. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a big thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos like this, click that subscribe button down below. And until next time, remember to always be completely you. Bye!